Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciated this opportunity to be here today. I'm honored to be in an event that honors two great defenders of democracy. Of course, the Secretary of Defense, Jim Mattis, and his years of service to our country. We're incredibly grateful and honored to be in your presence tonight in this well-deserved award. And the other is someone I'm very proud of, known her personally, and every time I don't watch the United Nations every day, okay? But I mean, but I do when Nikki Haley is on, because it means the bad guys are screaming, and I'm just so proud of the work she does. We obviously wish Senator McCain was here with us, and we pray for his return to the Senate as soon as possible. We definitely need him. And I know Lindsey is going to speak tonight. He can obviously speak a lot more. But I have a 30-second anecdote I thought you'd find funny. And if most of you know Senator McCain, you'll know this is a true story. I'm not just making it up. So I was only in the Senate for a year, and he cooks up this idea of a codel to Libya. Understand, at the time Libya had no government. Gaddafi was out of power, but he had not yet been found. But I figured, McCain's going on the trip. It's got to be a real trip. So we go to Malta. He makes us climb mountains. It's nuts. 6 in the morning. We got to meet, go over some itinerary for like an 18-hour day. And it's like, it's Malta, great place, but the next morning, we get on a plane. The plane is a little strange. It didn't look like the Codel planes. I'd only been on a couple up to that point, but this did not look like a regular Codel plane. It had like 3 seats and a bunch of crates and the boxes in the back. To this day, I don't know what was in the boxes. I doubt it was lethal aid, but who knows? I don't know what was in there. It's not even a real plane. We land, and when you land, you always expect, the police is going to be there, the State Department is going to be there to escort. No, it's like 4 guys in pickup trucks with guns in the back. Each from a different militia, so we're just hoping it all works out. But I'm still thinking this gotta be. It's McCain's on this trip. It's got some dangerous thing. It's it just feels that way. And it all worked out fine. We ended up. I'll never forget this. We go to some prison where they have all these mercenaries that Gaddafi had hired jailed, and McCain promptly orders them all released. And if Lindsey's here, can confirm this. And I said, no, they will be released in 30 minutes after we have left and created a buffer between us and them. And I don't know if they were released or not, but we flew back. We get back to Malta. The embassy people are a little freaked out. I begin to piece together bits and pieces of it. No one's quite sure whose plane it was, how we got it. And frankly, one of them said, you're lucky they waited for you guys to bring you back. So at that point, I figured I'm not traveling with him anymore, because except like we'll go to Munich, because I think that's fairly safe. But only because, I said, look, I also made him watch a movie called Machete. He made me watch The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo movie. So I made him watch a movie called Machete. It's the grotesque movie. But I figure it was, if some of you have seen it, you'll know, whatever. And, but I just thought it was good revenge. And then the other thing I said to him at the end, I said, look, John, I don't mind a minor wound in defense of democracy, but I don't want to be a martyr, okay? And so I'm going to stick to the Codels, to places that have embassies and governments. And but we miss him terribly, and we hope to see him back soon. But it's great that Jimmy McCain is here, and I know he's so proud of his entire family. So briefly, I just want to say this 35th anniversary of the IRI, it comes at I don't think it's an exaggeration to say it's the most perilous time for democracy, perhaps in a quarter century, and maybe longer. At the end of the 20th century, there was this feeling that democracy, liberal democracy, free economies was kind of here to stay. It was inevitable. It was going to continue on its own. There would never, every now and then there would be somebody pop up and try to be a dictator, but democracy would become the new normal. And this widespread optimism really continued up until very recently. But then a series of factors, I believe, over the last 2 decades have contributed to not just eroding democracy's standing, but frankly, I believe democracy's future. Globalization, technology, automation, they've rapidly transformed our economies. And a lot of good has come from that transformation. But it's also displaced a lot of people in developed economies. And in addition to that, rapid cultural changes, including some triggered by mass migrations, have left millions of people feeling out of sorts. Any sort of massive transformation will do that to any society. And the economic changes in particular, driven by outsourcing and technology and automation, all these different things have really left people feeling, in many parts of the world, including the United States, insecure about their economic standing and about their future. And so the result is, if you look across this planet, we have democratic societies which, as a result of cultural changes, societal changes, and economic changes, you have democracies across the world that are politically polarized, culturally divided, and frankly, with millions of people that feel economically insecure. And exacerbating all that is that in order for democracy to function, you've got to create a governing consensus. And that's hard to do in places that are politically polarized and divided, where politics become a blood sport and the people on the other side are not just wrong, they're evil in the mindset of those engaged in the political process. And then all of it, of course, is open for the whole world to see because we're democracies. And our societies are open, and we broadcast this stuff, and we exaggerate it. And we cover politics today as entertainment, but this is happening all over the world as well. And so not only are we polarized and unable to get results in many of these democracies, it's open for everyone to see and oftentimes appear even worse than it really is. Now contrast that to what autocratic governments are showing people. From a society standpoint, they could create the facade that they're a unified society. We have no differences in our country. Because, of course, anyone that has a different opinion is either in jail or in exile. And they can also, economically, point to success. They say, look at our economies. They're some of the fastest growing economies in the world. In fact, and I just said this as I came in, I triple-checked it, for the first time in a century, democracies now represent less than half of global GDP, and it continues to fall, while autocratic governments are now over 50% and rapidly climbing. This is a startling statistic. It's not a result of autocracy, but it's a result of other factors, but it's in play here. And then on top of all that, politically, their governments are able to act swiftly. When they want to do something, they can do it, because in China, you don't have to have a town hall meeting before you build a bridge or take someone's property. You just do it. The result, and then of course there's no negative news coming out of these countries. None. I always laugh. Somebody said to me the other day, but Putin is very popular in Russia. And I said, let me tell you something. If all of my opponents were in jail and I controlled the media, I'd be at 80%, okay? So, maybe even 85, I don't know. But in fact, some of these guys even hold elections, right? There's this fake one going on in Venezuela on Sunday. Putin just had a fake election. Turkey's going to have one. Everyone's going to have. Why is it a fake election? People are going to vote, but it's not a real election when your opponents are in jail. You're the only one that can get messages out in the media. And by the way, if things go crazy and wrong, you can just get into the ballot box and change the results. So they are able to create the facade of democracy. And so what the result today is that democracy faces a challenge we never faced from the Soviet Union. And that challenge is that they can now say our economies are as good, if not better, than the ones that democracies are producing. China, other countries, that we can produce security and a standard of living as good, if not better, than those of the democracies. And, insecurity and polarization has always been the fertilizer that allows autocrats to take control, the allure, of the strong leader that's going to restore security and prosperity and make things the way they used to be in the good old days. Well, for the first time in almost a century, democracy faces the threat that autocratic governments, to some people, could theoretically, at least from an economic standpoint, appear to them to be more attractive than democracy is. And this threat, by the way, is only going to get worse. Imagine all of these countries that have built entire economies and a middle class on cheaper labor than the West. What's going to happen when those people all lose their jobs to machines? Can you imagine the tumult and the chaos in those societies? And these governments, these young democracies, many of them do not have the institutions with the roots that ours do to stand up or find a way forward. All of this means that solving our problems and showing that democracy works is more important than ever. One of the greatest contributions that we can make to the spread of democracy is to make it work here in our country. To allow people to look at our democratic order and say, yes, they are open and these people argue, but at the end of the day, they don't hate each other and they work together to get things solved. The power of our example, I believe, has inspired, as much as anything else, millions of people across the world to aspire to be democratic nations. And so, as we conduct our democratic activity here in our own country, beginning here at home, we need to be more cognizant of the fact that the world is watching us. And if we put out an image of chaos and division and hatred and anger and mean-spiritedness towards one another, why would anyone be attracted to that? Why would anyone want that to be their future? Maybe people in their 60s, 70s, and 50s that remember living in an autocratic society, but for a 20-year-old that's desperate for economic prosperity, and they have been fooled into believing that that's what Putin or that's what China is offering their people through autocratic government, and they look at the images out of America, oftentimes misstated by RT and any other propaganda agent that's out there spreading this fake news about us or exaggerating it. We have an enormous responsibility here at home to live democracy, because our example in and of itself is one of the greatest promoters of democracy the world has ever known. This isn't about being nice to each other. This is about the very future of democracy and whether it can prevail and continue. And why does this matter? And I'll close with this. Because the first reason why it matters is because democracy is morally superior to dictatorships and autocratic regimes. They are not two different ways to govern people. There is one that is good, grounded in the belief that every human being has a right to determine their own future and have a role in determining the future of their society, their nation, and their families. And the other is grounded in the belief that none of us have any rights other than what our leaders allow us to have. They are not morally equivalent, and we should not be ashamed to say that. And we should not be embarrassed to say that. And I don't know what's happened, but there are a lot of people today that basically approach autocratic governments as just another way to govern. This is not another way to govern. It is evil. At its core, it is evil. And democracy is not perfect, but it is moral. And it is right. And we should not be afraid to make that argument. The second is national security and common sense. Look at the world today. Iran, ISIS, Russia, China, Venezuela. What do they all have in common? They're all autocratic governments that are creating all the instability in the world. The GDP of Spain is equivalent to that of Russia. They're not invading their neighbors or interfering in our elections, because the democratic governments have to respond to their people. And they have to respond to their people in ways that do not allow them this sort of adventurism and evil towards others. For me, it's personal. I've grown up and lived my entire life in a community of people whose lives were basically determined by the loss of freedom and democracy. And it does not escape me to wonder, what would my community and people like me be like, or where would we be today, if just 90 miles to the north, there had not been the freest and most prosperous nation in all of human history? What if there had never been an America, or at least one the way we know it and knew it? Imagine what the world would have looked like, and imagine what many of our own lives would have been like. And so those of us who have benefited from the blessing of democracy, I believe, have a special obligation to defend it and to help those who aspire to it for themselves. We have a huge challenge ahead, and I believe it's one we can confront, and I believe it's one we can solve. It will not be easy, but every generation before us has faced a similar threat, and they rose to the challenge and embraced those opportunities. Now the moment has come for us to do the same. I'll close with these words from that speech you just saw a moment ago in 1982, Ronald Reagan before the British Parliament. He said, quote, "During the dark days of the Second World War, when this island was incandescent with courage, Winston Churchill exclaimed about Britain's adversaries, 'What kind of people do they think we are?' Well, Britain's adversaries found out what extraordinary people the British are. But all the democracies paid a terrible price for allowing the dictators to underestimate us. We dare not make that same mistake again. So let us ask ourselves, what kind of people do we think we are? And let us answer, free people, worthy of freedom, and determined not only to remain so, but to help others gain their freedom as well. We are free people. That is who we are. A revolution that began 240 some odd years ago, but still continues. That's who we are. And we should confront those who challenge it with all the spirit and all the vigor of that generation in World War II, and our parents and our grandparents and those who came before us. And that's why I'm so happy to be standing with you here tonight, and am so proud to support the work of the International Republican Institute. And I thank you for giving me the chance to speak to you. Thank you.